It's wonderful to have you talking to us on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you.
We know that you've been spending some time in Central Asia. We hear that you like going to the region.
I do very much.
And your most recent trip was to Uzbekistan, where you led a delegation at the Tashkent, Afghanistan conference. So, Tashkent conference has emerged as yet another platform to discuss the future of Afghanistan. But there are other platforms too. So how is this different than others?
The important thing about the Tashkent conference is that it's linked to the Kabul process, and especially to the offer made by President Ghani to the Taliban to sit at the peace table in Afghanistan and construct a reconciliation process between Afghans, between brothers and sisters. And for us, what was interesting and useful about Tashkent is that it took the purpose of President Ghani and it took a process that began in Kabul, it brought it to Tashkent, and then it internationalized it. And because of the vast number of countries that participated, I think it sent a very strong message to the Taliban that the only way out is through negotiations, and that the international community wants to see a successful reconciliation process.
But is the international community on the same page when it comes to Afghanistan? Because we had so many representatives from so many different parts of the world with divergent interests.
No, listen, it's a great question. Many countries, especially Afghanistan's neighbors, have different interests in Afghanistan. But I think all of the participants understood the importance of peace in Afghanistan, and all understand the importance of creating a reconciliation process in which these different countries can play a role, different kinds of roles depending on their interests and on their influence. But I think that what we're really focused on here, and I think in some ways the government of Uzbekistan needs to be congratulated on this, is the way in which they have tried to democratize this process and use the interests of many different countries to drive both sides to the negotiating table and convince them that they really need to begin a reconciliation process that will be not just for the greater good of Afghanistan, but by creating a degree of stability and peace and then prosperity, open opportunities for other countries to benefit from that, but especially to address security concerns.
So do you think countries like Pakistan, Russia, China, India, Afghanistan, and 5 countries of Central Asia are going to be able to work together on this? Because to say that we want to work together is very easy. Yes. But then we also know that there are so many different tensions between these countries.
And this is the challenge of diplomacy. Mm-hmm. It's the challenge that we face. It's the challenge that the Uzbek government and the other Central Asian countries face. And it's an Uzbek-hosted event, and in many ways an Uzbek conceived event, but it had broad support from all of the Central Asian countries, because the Central Asian countries recognize that they sit on top of Afghanistan, and what happens in Afghanistan has a big impact. I think that, first of all, we need to take countries at their word until they show us otherwise, or reason not to take them at their word. But also, many of the differences that have emerged between countries around Afghanistan have really emerged around how you fight the war. And now it's really time to call people to the peace table and say, this is where we need solidarity with the people of Afghanistan, with the government of Afghanistan, and this is where the international community can play a meaningful role.
So what is next now, following the Tashkent conference?
We're in the process of consulting with our partners right now about this, obviously. With our Central Asian partners, especially with our Uzbek partners, but also, broadly speaking, during the conference itself, we had an opportunity to have extended discussions with some of our more important partners in the region. And so we're looking at what the next steps could be and should be.
How do you feel about the security in Pakistan specifically? Because we know that the Trump administration has notified the Pakistani government that your diplomats will not or are not allowed to travel more than 40 kilometers from their posts. Is that true?
Our diplomats are under travel restrictions, and they can travel farther, but they have to notify the government of Pakistan. And so it's very common in diplomacy. But what's important here, what's important to note and underscore, is that we've had some very fruitful conversations with the government of Pakistan about events inside of Afghanistan. And it's my hope that we're going to be able to build off those in a way that helps this broader reconciliation process.
Is the U.S. government going to restrict the movement or the travels of the Pakistani diplomats here in Washington?
Typically, these kinds of restrictions are reciprocal in nature. So I'll just leave it at that.
You have met President Shavkat Mirziyoyev a few times now. What kind of a leader is he in your eyes?
I think he's done remarkable things in a very short period of time. And he has opened Uzbekistan to engagement with its neighbors in a remarkable way, and a way that I think has radiated very positively in the region. The Afghan conference is another example of how he is able to take what he has accomplished regionally and internationalize it in a really interesting fashion. And we've also found him to be very open to engaging with us broadly on the strategic nature of our partnership and to explore how we can enhance the relationship. And so from our point of view, he's proven to be an excellent partner.
There is almost unlimited demand for assistance and support in Uzbekistan's reform process, and I know that you have held some wide-ranging discussions with the Uzbek officials, with the Uzbek leadership on this. You're a very experienced diplomat. You know what America has done to promote reforms around the world over the years. What does the United States do well and doesn't do well when it comes to supporting reforms or such processes?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, to begin with, our reform efforts have the greatest impact when we have a partner to work with, when we have a partner that understands the importance of the reforms and is prepared to take the steps necessary to begin a reform process. Where we are sometimes challenged is understanding the importance of patience and understanding the importance of constancy. In other words, if we're beginning a reform process, we have to create a reform process that can be politically sustainable over time and that we can build off of over time. In other words, it allows us to consolidate each step along the way. And this requires us to recognize that these processes take time, especially for countries. Central Asia is a perfect example. These are deep civilizations and deep cultures that have very, very long histories, but as countries, as political entities, they have fairly new histories. And the histories have involved both Soviet domination and then independence with all of the challenges that independence presents, and now they find themselves in a part of the world ringed by significant security problems. And so as we engage, we have to understand the context in which we're working. Mm-hmm. But it's all about picking the right partner. And
so you see Mirziyoyev as a willing partner, open partner.
He's been a good partner for us. I mean, obviously this is a process. Mm-hmm. And the Uzbeks are evaluating us as we evaluate them. But I think what has emerged, at least in my visits to Uzbekistan and in my engagement with the government, is a willingness to engage with us in a very direct and open way, a clear understanding on the part of the Uzbek government and the president and the foreign ministry of what it is we're looking for, and a recognition that the extent to which the government of Uzbekistan can continue this reform process, that it enhances its ability to have a deeper relationship with the United States, but also a deeper relationship with other important partners, especially in Europe and in Asia.
Where does Central Asia fit in America's foreign policy priorities now?
Well, I mean, it's an important part of the world, and it's a part of the world that is trying to define itself and ensure that it doesn't get dragged once again into the great game, into power politics.
Which is something that Washington has always said we're not playing.
Exactly. And our purpose through our different efforts in the region, especially the C5+1 initiative, is to give the countries of Central Asia an option, a partnership option outside of their immediate region and outside of their immediate neighbors, so that they have some degree of leverage to establish some independence. We recognize that, like any part of the world and any country, the countries of Central Asia have histories, and they have neighbors that are not going away, and that they have to find ways to build relationships with those neighbors. But as we do so, we want to make sure that they understand that they have a meaningful and reliable partner outside of their region that will help them globalize in ways that benefit their populations.
When you talk to the Central Asian officials, do you hear or sense a vision for themselves, let's say, for the next 10, 15 years? Because we know that Washington thinks that way. You strategize that way. You want to look that far. But do you think that the leaders in the region have that kind of a vision about themselves?
It is being built now, and it's being built through the engagements that we're seeing in the region, because the C5 now meets on its own. And so they're having these larger discussions. And obviously, each of the Central Asian countries is different. They each have their own immediate concerns, and that has to be respected and understood. But there are areas of commonality: border management, water management, movement of goods, services, and peoples, Afghanistan, and what that means for security in the region, and the broader security concerns that they face. And because of this, I think we are seeing, especially because of the new openness in Uzbekistan and how it's engaging with the Central Asian countries, we're seeing a more expansive kind of strategic thinking being done by the regional governments.
And where do you see the region yourself in 10, 15 years? What would you like to see the region to be?
Listen, so much will depend on the decisions that are made, number one. So much will depend on what happens in Afghanistan. And so much will also depend on the kinds of relationships that we are able to build among the different countries that impact immediately on Central Asia: Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey. But speaking for myself and what I kind of perceive coming from my different trips to the region and my engagement with leaders and foreign ministries and foreign ministers, is we'd very much like to see a region that is not a crash pad between great powers, but is a facilitator of the movement of trade, of goods and services, in a region that is going to become very important economically, and which sits right above the larger Indian Ocean rim, which is going to be one of the most important strategic areas of either cooperation or competition in the 21st century because of the goods and services and the oil and gas that moves through this region, and a grouping of Central Asian countries that are at peace with their neighbors, that have built meaningful relationships in the region and among each other, but also have been able to, through outreach into Europe, into North America, into Asia and beyond, have become meaningful markets for other parts of the world, meaningful points of investment, but who are also able to act as connectors between the different regions of the world that surround Central Asia.
And we hear very similar vision from some of the Central Asian leaders too, by the way. Based on your conversations, again, in the region, what are some of your main concerns about the region right now, across the region, let's say in any country?
Well, first, the security concerns of these countries are real. And up to this point, they've done a pretty good job of managing the threat posed by violent extremism, And obviously, the emergence of organizations like ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan are very worrisome. This obviously is one of the reasons we're focused on a reconciliation and peace process, because as long as Afghanistan finds itself in the kind of internal conflict it faces now, it creates space for groups like ISIS Khorasan, and we believe that although we will continue to fight ISIS Khorasan, and recently we had some successes in terms of targeting leadership that has been very important, but if we can create an Afghanistan that's at peace, it's going to be much easier to create or turn Afghanistan into an exporter of security for the region and not an exporter of insecurity. And so that I think is going to be important, and how the kinds of security decisions that are made. Also, the continuing consolidation of democratic gains is going to be important, and that means the continuing consolidation of gains in human rights, in labor rights, and in the political opening of these societies. And again, our purpose is to promote sustainable change, and change that can be consolidated over time. But we're going to be very clear about what partnership with us means when it comes to democracy and human rights.
What can they expect from the U.S. as assistance now? Because we know that the assistance money has been going down. There hasn't really been a lot of money allocated to help these countries.
Well, I mean, actually, there has been, especially on the security side. But there's more we can do, and there's more we should do. And this is a larger debate that we will see here in Washington, especially in our Congress, because our Congress has shown that it is going to play an increasingly assertive role in determining not just how we spend our money, but the size of our budgets. And I think there is a clear recognition that Central Asia is important, and that we need to find ways to have a presence in Central Asia, and to be a meaningful partner in all aspects of the journey that these countries will be taking over the next several decades.
You mentioned Afghanistan as being one of the, Afghanistan being the source of concern for Central Asians. Pakistan is also mentioned as a source of concern. As you know, that many Uzbek militants for a long time were based in Pakistan, and we still hear from the security officials that there are remnants of those in Pakistan. How can Central Asia work with Pakistan as much as it is trying to work with Afghanistan now, and what could you do to help that process?
Well, I'm not sure how much we can help that process, because this is really something that the Pakistanis have to understand what the Central Asian countries, what their concerns are, and what it is the Central Asian countries are trying to accomplish. But I'll go back to a point I made earlier, which is it will be much easier to work with Pakistan in attempting to fashion peace in Afghanistan as opposed to trying to fashion a way to fight the war. And it's my hope that if we can start a larger reconciliation process, that Pakistan can play a meaningful and important role in that process. And if so, it will open, I believe, the possibilities for deeper conversations, especially with neighbors and especially with Central Asian countries.
Mm-hmm. What we have heard from the officials in the region is that, we have good bilateral relations with Pakistan, but when it comes to the security issues, when it comes to counterterrorism, fighting extremism, we need bigger partners to deal with.
Well,
in a way, they're counting on your pressure on
Pakistan.
I
understand, but we're not the only big partner. China is a very important partner, and especially for Pakistan.
How about Russia?
Russia is not as big a partner as China is for Pakistan, and Russia's historic role in the region is conflicted. But we're very, very prepared, and we'd be very happy to have a larger conversation.
And Russia has become more active with and in Afghanistan, as you know. Are you also concerned about that?
It depends what they're doing. I mean, if their purpose is to to help build a successful reconciliation process, then they're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.